The world of the Fallout game is filled with mysterious and strange characters, from simple heroes to huge mutants. Today we will talk about one of the most interesting and strange characters, Harold, the Talking Tree. Jack Rudy Geek Facts is with you, and we are starting. Harold was born in 2072 and was only 5 years old when the Great War began in 2077. Through the horrors of nuclear war, he was shut down in Shelter 29. Harold's new home was originally inhabited by children who were gathered by Diana. Diana was a human brain connected to a supercomputer. For the inhabitants of the shelter, she became a goddess. In case of internal unrest, Diana chose a test copy, which was released from the shelter ahead of time. The test copy was supposed to return back and tell the inhabitants of the shelter about the state of the world around them, and whether it was already possible to leave the shelter. Of course, none of them returned, and this does not contribute to the appearance of volunteers, and everything calmed down again. Harold was one of the test specimens in 2090. He was released from the shelter, but he was stunned by the security system and taken by a robot to reserve, where Diana was based. At the reserve, he has given a choice: stay with Diana or go exploring the outside world. However, if he decides to go on a trip, Diana will operate on him so that he cannot tell the outside world anything about Diana and the reserve. Harold agreed to stay with Diana but eventually managed to escape. During his travels, he kept information about the reserve a secret. He felt that it was his duty to the world to keep the gift intact until the world was ready. After a while, the doors of the shelter opened, and Harold began a successful career as a merchant traveling to the wastelands. Over time, he became an important member of the Hub, Old Town Collective. It was then that he noticed how mutated animals began to attack caravans much more often. Annoyed, he decided to deal with this outrage by going on an expedition in search of the causes of New Scourge. The expedition began in 2102, when Harold was 30 years old. Among the group of travelers was Richard Gray, a doctor at a hub who was intrigued by strange mutants. They tracked the mutant populations and eventually found the source of their appearance, the old Mariposa military base. Inside, most of the travelers were destroyed by mutants and automatic security systems, but a small group of travelers, along with Harold and Richard, were able to break deep into the base, where they found huge vats of green sludge, which it seems was the cause of the mutation of animals. That's when Richard's robotic arm dropped him into one of the wards, where he turned into a master of mutants. Harold decided that he just died there. Harold was stunned and woke up in the desert, starting to mutate. There he was picked by a passing caravan and taken to the hub, where he settled and began to eke out a miserable existence. The hero of Fallout 1 meets him at the hub when Harold was already a very old, sick beggar. He became eccentric and chatty. Many of his stories are hopelessly outdated, but the hero can learn a lot of usable things from him in exchange for a trifle about the Mariposa military base, the story of Richard Gray, a pack of death clothes near the old town. Sometime between 2162 and 2241, a small tree began to grow on Harold's head. Harold called him Bob, but sometimes jokingly teases Bob with Herbert. This is a completely new kind of tree, as unique as Harold himself. After the events of the destruction of the Master and his army, Harold left the hub and became a traveler, having visited many corners of the wasteland. It is known that he visited Carbon in Texas, where he had fun with the local prostitute Ruby. Harold was about to leave this city due to the approach of the army of super mutants, but had to stay because as a result of his sexual pleasures, he lost an arm, a finger, and an eye in the city. A recruit from the Steel Brothers helped him in the search for lost body parts, and Harold went to the city of Gule-Los in the area of 2208. These journeys ended in Gecko in 2238. In 2241, Harold was still an old but still very active ghoul. Everyone considered him a ghoul, but Harold himself never recognized himself as such. The Chosen One meets with Harold and Gecko in the city of ghouls near the city of Refuge. After the destruction of Necropolis in the first Fallout, most of the ghoul population migrated far north and formed a new city around the old nuclear power plant built by Poseidon Oil before the Great War. Anyone would have died from high doses of radiation, but the ghouls were only benefited by radiation. When Harold arrived there, the power plant was in disrepair and was being operated extremely carelessly. He quickly took control of the good-natured but dim-witted leaders of Gecko and restored the reactor to more or less tolerable condition. When the Chosen One arrives at Gecko, Harold asks him for help with repairs. In his travels, the Chosen One also learned some rumors about Harold. Judging by them, his tree became even bigger and even grew one fruit. The fruit seeds turned out to be surprisingly resistant, and some of them even sprouted in the most barren parts of the wasteland. In 2250, Harold fell ill. The tree on his head began to wither from an unknown disease. To his surprise, Harold discovered that Bob's illness was affecting him as well. He doubted that he would die from it, but he felt that something was wrong in his head. So he went on a journey in search of a cure. It wasn't an easy journey. People really didn't want mutants hanging around them. He continued his quest until he arrived at the Twin Mothers tribe, formed from the descendants of his old house of Refugee 29. To his surprise, the tribe accepted him for what he had become. He explained his problem to the leaders, and they went to their goddess for advice. A few days later, a shaman visited him and handed him a mysterious elixir. The drink was disgusting, but it worked. Bob felt better, and he was happy again. Touched, Harold offered his help to the tribe in any matter. They thanked him with a smile, but declined his offer. Instead, they offered to introduce him to their goddess. Then he was escorted to their sacred temple for a personal audience. He was not greatly surprised by the hologram of a woman, but was shocked by the suggestion of where he could find her, in a nearby nature reserve. His return to the reserve pleased Diana and Harold himself, and his childhood memories had been erased over the years. He spent a lot of time alone. He even considered settling in the gardens of the reserve for the rest of his days. However, one day he went on trips further east again. If the prisoner, the main character in Van Buren the cancelled Fallout 3 game, gives Diana information about Thief, the mutated slime of a master, and the new block, then Diana will create a cure for the virus in the form of a small fruit artificially grown from Harold's tree. Over time, Harold became overwhelmed by Bob's rapid growth and one day found himself rooted directly to the ground. It happened during his travels in the northern part of the capital region. Here he was discovered by several people who began to worship him as a god, forming a small secretive cult of the Ancient Ones. The bean bloomed and many plants grew in the area, creating a unique green corner of life. At this time, Harold developed a mutation with which he became able to see the area beyond the oasis through the trees that grew from the bean seeds. Harold used this ability to bring wanderers to him in the hope that one of them would end his suffering. Unfortunately, the Drevens greeted all the guests with a mandatory purification rite through drinking his sacred juice. Many simply refused the dubious offer, and those who agreed lost the remnants of their sanity. But one day his passion is rewarded in 2277, and a lonely wanderer comes to him, Fallout 3, and Harold orders his elders to let him in. After the drinking the dubious juice, the wanderer loses consequences and wakes up next to Harold, who tells his story of turning into a tree. He begs the hero to finish him off, as standing in one place for decades is a real torture for him. For a while he entertained himself in the role of a tree god, giving his followers funny tasks, but this entertainment got bored very quickly. He asked them to kill themselves, but the Drevens refused to take his words literally, believing that this is such a test of faith. Only 2 members of the cult, the leader and his wife, interpret his request more actively. The leader believes that the oasis must be kept secret, and for this to stop its expansion, and his wife wants to accelerate its growth by spreading life in the wasteland as quickly as possible. Harold insists of his murder by destroying his heart, which was moved deep into the caves by Bob's roots. Harold can also be burned with the appropriate weapon, but according to him, this prospect is too frightening. If the wanderer decides to end the quest with the option of saving his life, then in subsequent conversation with Harold, he will continue to complain about the painful stand in life. However, the wanderer can convince him that he has been given a unique gift, and with the help of this gift, he saves the lives of a lot of people, and the ancient ones will die without him. After that, Harold will realize how selfish his motives were, confer with Bob about this noble goal, and finally find peace of mind. Now, Harold is finally happy.